If those of you are just joining us, we were talking about our good friend, former state representative Raj Goyal, who we are mutual friends with. We're going to wait a second to let everybody join. People are still filing in right now. As you can tell, I'm in my new glasses phase of my life. I didn't have glasses until age 49, and now I'm just getting used to. I'm moving.
Oh
If
my
I'm on
God.
reading glasses, I'll soon be at bifocals. I think.
So do you want to hear a story about so I got glasses in fourth grade, Mr.
Oh,
Sirota.
so you've been okay,
Wow.
okay,
But
yeah,
you think it's
yep,
all peaches and cream. No,
yeah.
no. So being nearsighted and getting glasses at an early age leads to a detached retina, which I just had. I just went through that. And anyhow, it's just
And
endless
Ro, you've managed
misery.
to avoid glasses.
Oh, yeah, maybe I don't read enough. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you're my age, right? Aren't you?
I am 48. We're right
Yeah.
around the
See?
same age.
Yeah.
So maybe
Okay.
it's one more year. One more year.
By the way, Rokana, I think so. How are you doing? I
Good. How are
think
you?
we overlapped at the University of Chicago for a couple of years.
Oh, did
Oh
we? I
wow.
was there in the 90s.
Yeah,
Oh.
me too. I was running the Baffler magazine over on the other side of the Midway. We were on 61st Street. We had
Oh, of
an
course.
office. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So listen, we're gonna start. We've got a lot of people here. We're gonna start right now. So first of all, I wanna thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank the Levers subscribers. I want to thank, in particular, our paying subscribers who help make our journalism possible. We literally wouldn't be able to do the work that we do. I want to thank Khanna, Congressman Khanna, who has regularly engaged with independent media generally, with us specifically. We're going to talk about the role of media in the Democratic Party's debacle. I want to thank Tom Frank, who needs no introduction, but I'll introduce you as the great author, the great columnist, the great writer. Tom Frank and I, as an aside, we hung out at the Democratic Convention. As I think I said something to the effect of the Democratic Convention did a good job of rendering in miniature the caste system of America. There were different badges and different credentials
Yeah.
that you needed to get into everything. It was like,
And some of them were secret. Do you remember this? So
right, yeah,
there were the
yeah,
ones that you could apply for and get, and you'd see people wearing them. And then there are some people that had ones that you never heard about. And I
yes.
quoted you saying that in a French newspaper.
Yes, yes. The Democratic Party had rendered America's caste system inside of the United Center. So today we're going to talk about the once and future Democratic Party, if we presume that it will still exist. It does still exist. I think a lot of people have been feeling unmoored by what happened in the election. And so I think what we're going to do is we're going to start there, and then we're going to take your questions. If you want to post a question in the chat, you can do that. That's the easiest way, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can. So here's what I'm going to do first. I think most people here have read what I've said about the election. So I want to hear from our guests about the election. So I'm going to start with Ro Khanna with a simple, straightforward question. What do you think happened in the election? I mean, we know Donald Trump won the election, but what is the story of what happened in the election to your mind, the story and perhaps one or two lessons?
Well, thank you, David, for having me on. Congratulations on all of the success and growth of Lever. Tom, I read a lot of your stuff, so it's a real pleasure to be on. And Tom's the real expert on this, so I'm looking forward to hearing from him. Look, it was going to be an uphill race with the president's approval where it was and with inflation. And what I didn't understand from day one is why while we were saying, quote unquote, we were the underdog, we really were running as if we were ahead with prevent defense, as opposed to running actually like an underdog would. Because if you really believe, as I did, that this was going to be a uphill race, you would have taken a very different approach in terms of the boldness and in terms of what needed to be done. The first thing I think that was off is we just did not acknowledge the reality of how many Americans feel. I mean, not just working class Americans, but probably 50, 60, 70% of Americans, that their life for the last 50 years has not been great economically, that you have had job shift offshore. They see an economic and political system that it hasn't worked for them. They see all the wealth piling up in districts like mine in Silicon Valley with globalization. They're wondering, you know, what's in it for their kids. And now you've got inflation compounding that. So you go and you're paying higher prices for food and gas. And we're out there sort of not really understanding the justified anger of folks. And I think the first step is just to see people feel like you hear them, you see them. Bernie does this, Trump does this in a dystopian way. I don't think we spent enough time doing that. I mean, we didn't recognize the actual legitimate anger. And then I think we needed to have two things. We need to say, look, we shouldn't be a party where billionaires can buy elections, and we understand that you feel the political system is rigged. So ours is the party that isn't going to be for the for PAC money and all of the big money and getting. We're going to be the party that's actually on a more grassroots agenda, and then we're going to be the party for the reindustrialization of this country. We're going to be the party that's going to actually put up new factories. We're going to be the party that's going to have 100,000 new machinists and electricians and plumbers and put the investments in there. We're going to be the party that's going to give workers a chance to have a fair share of the profits and really run on an economic populist agenda. Explain that part of the reason people are paying too much, and I'll turn it over to Tom, is a very simple reason. Like the shipping costs are very, very high. So, you know, when you want to buy something in a store, it's really costs a lot because the shipping costs are so high. Well, guess why the shipping costs are so high? Partly because it's all done by China and Asia. We don't have any American shipping companies, and it's a cartel. So we're the ones who are going to go after these shipping people who are fixing prices so that prices actually come down. We needed concrete initiatives like that to speak to where people were at.
Tom Frank, your analysis of the election and any lessons that we can take just from the election results.
Okay, well, Ro Khanna hit the big themes there. So let's just put aside for this a second the immediate issues of inflation and immigration and talk about the sort of broader economic shift. Look, so I recently moved out of Kansas City permanently, so I no longer have a connection there, but you used to drive in this radius around Kansas City, and every medium-sized town, every small town, every agricultural community was in this state of sort of shocking dilapidation. These are, you've seen it. We've all seen it. I mean, you're in Denver, am I right?
Yep.
Yeah, Denver's doing really well. So a lot of Kansas City is doing really well. But you visit these towns that used to have manufacturing or mining or, farm to market or whatever it was, and they're all in this sort of incredible state of decay. This has been going on for decades. Nobody has a plan for them, our team doesn't have a plan for them. The plan is, learn to code, right? Go to college. I just get so sick of hearing that. And Trump's plan is Trump will fix it, right? You saw the signs, right? Trump will fix it. And this is, there is a broader shift underway that I have been writing about now. This is the 20th anniversary of What's the Matter with Kansas, of the working class away from the Democratic Party and the sort of professional class or white collar elite or whatever you want to call them, away from the Republicans and into the Democratic Party. So the neighborhood where I grew up in suburban Kansas City, where I was surrounded by these, very wealthy people. My family was not wealthy, but we nevertheless somehow wound up living there. And I got to know these people really well. And I thought when I was a kid, I thought these are the most Republican people I'm ever going to meet in my life, right? They worshiped at the shrine of Bob Dole. They're all Democrats now. This is the ruling elite of this country has moved as one over to the Democratic Party, and the vast working class majority has moved the other way. And obviously this is really depressing. This is a really awful thing to behold. It's not hard I've been writing about this for years. It didn't surprise me that it just got worse. I mean, and now the mainstream media is finally taking notice of it after all these years. And here's the problem, and this is what I want to talk about with you guys. I don't know if it can be reversed. I don't know if this phenomenon can be reversed. I sometimes wonder if we aren't in the grip of some sociological force that none of us understand. And the reason I say that is because the same thing is happening everywhere you go in the Western world. So I got an email today from a guy in Sweden who says the exact same thing is happening here. I go to France all the time. The same thing is happening there. You know, the areas that were formerly voted for the actual Communist Party are now like all on fire for Marine Le Pen. You go to Australia, and the Australian Labor Party, to its great credit, is very worried about this phenomenon and has been trying to do something about it for years, but it just continues by this sort of force of its own. And we know what a Democratic Party that connected with those people would look like and what it would promise. And Ro Khanna just spelled it out, right? We know what it would entail, but I wonder if that's I wonder, first of all, if that's good enough. And you guys, you can just shut me up immediately by saying, yes, Tom, that would be good enough. We would start to win again. Okay, second point, if that is enough, how do we do it? Right? How do we get the leadership faction of the Democratic Party to finally look in the mirror and understand what they have, the blunders that they have made over the years, because they're in love with this ideology, and I see no sign of them beginning to question it or to doubt what they've said over the years or any of those sort of things.
So I want to ask a question about the Democratic Party's strategy, and we're getting a lot of questions, so please post your questions. And Ro, I want to try to play the audio of a clip. I'm going to play it from my phone here because we don't know how to use the exact Zoom technology. I'm going to play it from my phone, and this was something that Chuck Schumer said.
Sorry, guys, it's my cat will not leave.
That's okay. This is what Chuck Schumer said in 2016 about the Democratic Party's theory of how to win.
The second point. For every blue-collar Democrat we will lose in Western PA, we will pick up 2, 3 moderate Republicans in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And you can repeat that in Ohio and Illinois and Wisconsin. The voters who are most out there figuring out what to do are not the blue-collar Democrats. They are the college-educated Republicans who lean Republican or are independent and in the suburbs.
So that was Chuck Schumer in 2016. And I feel like that has been the theory of how Democrats should run elections, not just how they should run elections, but the orientation of their party. And I think my question to you is, you just heard Tom Frank talking about how most of those disaffected Rockefeller Republicans, country club Republicans, whatever you want to call them, most of them are now Democrats. So strategically, you're trying to get more votes, or the party's been trying to focus on, wringing the towel to get a few more drops of those voters out of disaffected Republicans, rather than focusing on the bigger pool of working class voters. And my theory on why that's been the formula is because it's less offensive to the Democratic Party's donor class to appeal to upper income disaffected Republicans on issues like choice, or by showing them Liz Cheney, then that's less offensive to the donor class. That's not offensive to the donor class. Whereas appealing to working class people on, hey, we're not gonna have NAFTA, we're going to crack down on corporations, that is offensive to the donor class. Do you agree with that? And if you do agree with that, what's the solution then?
So let me take Schumer's quote, as opposed to in the abstract, of blue-collar workers and suburban voters, very specifically, because I grew up in Pennsylvania and was born in Philadelphia. Grew up in Bucks County, which was a relatively blue county, suburban county, when I was growing up. I mean, it had Republican congresspeople, but usually voted Democratic, and now voted for Trump. My parents are still in Bucks County. We're saying they've never seen as many Trump signs in Bucks County. So certainly the suburban theory hasn't worked out in Pennsylvania, and Berks County, where John Updike wrote and was born, also somewhat suburban, and that also is red. in Western Pennsylvania, which kind of Chuck Schumer just, in that clip dismissed as other blue collar workers. I was just in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. You know what the first thing people still talk about there? That they produce more steel in World War II in Western Pennsylvania than Japan and Germany combined. More steel. And so I had introduced this bill called the Modern Steel Bill. I said, why can't the president, Trump ran in 16 saying you can't be a nation without steel or aluminum. Why can't we be the party and Joe Biden say we're going to bring back steel? Like, not everything has to be chips and science. I wrote that, helped write that bill. Not everything has to be solar. Like, let's just build back modern steel. We'll put up 3 steel factories, one in Western Pennsylvania, one in Ohio, one in Michigan. Joe Biden will be the president who's actually bringing it back steel. Turns out they're 1/6 the carbon footprint, and it's productive. But the answer I got back is, well, Larry Summers says there are only 83,000 steel jobs in America. And I said, this is missing the point. There is a sense of loss in this country, a sense of loss that stretches from Western Pennsylvania to Bucks County. It's not like the mid-career professional in Bucks County is suddenly doing really well and thriving. They're still concerned that their kids may have debt. They're still concerned whether their kids can buy a house. They have more in common in terms of the economic anxieties and struggles with Western Pennsylvania than they do with the dot-com millionaires in my district. And I think what the Democratic Party needs is a message and an actual platform of massive economic development, reindustrialization in every place and part of this country that hasn't been part of modern prosperity, recognizing we spend 400 to 1 today on college education as opposed to people who don't have a college degree, 400 to 1 federally,
Oh my God.
and have a real platform. And don't denigrate PhDs, and you don't have to bash higher education, but you have to say that we haven't been in this together. We've allowed the decaying of communities and working class communities. And so that I think it's a solvable issue, but we have to be committed to a laser focus of how many people have felt left out of the modern economy.
Okay, so Tom, I want to build off that and ask.
That's exactly right, though, and really well put. He's exactly right. There's been nothing for these people, and nobody has a plan for them. Go ahead.
But here's the question. So the way I see it is that you look at the study about what happened after NAFTA, the study that showed the strongest Democratic districts quickly became the strongest Republican districts in trade exposed districts. That happened right as NAFTA happened.
PNTR China was the big one, right?
Yes.
They're both under Clinton, but
yes. Although that study, interestingly enough, I think it was from Princeton, PNTR China did not have as much of a political effect because it was not as media elevated as NAFTA was.
Right.
We're old enough to
NAFTA was a huge
remember.
debate. Yeah,
it was a huge debate. I mean, it was on national TV, Ross Perot and the like. So you had that with NAFTA. You had people's trust in government, I think, weakened when that happened. Then there was Obama, who promised hope and change, promised a real crackdown, promised a real paradigm shift in the midst of the financial crisis. And in my view, they took hope and change and they converted it into a rescue of bankers as millions of people were thrown out of their homes, which disillusioned a lot of people and set the conditions for the backlash politics of the Tea Party, as you wrote about in your book, and then ultimately Trump. All of that leads to a question. Oh, and then the asterisk is Biden does a big investment in the working class. The biggest investment, by the way, I think in at least in my lifetime, in the American Rescue Plan, Roe voted for it. The Democrats passed it. A really big, important bill.
Well, since Johnson anyway, since
Johnson in my lifetime, right? And then the benefits expire and get ripped away. So people had a taste of what a little bit more robust investment felt like, and then it was ripped away. So the question that comes from all of this is, if people's trust that the government can or will do anything is just destroyed, the old fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. If it's destroyed and the Democrats are the party of the government can actually deliver and help you. But if people's trust in that fundamental premise, whether it's a Democratic premise or a Republican premise, is destroyed, isn't the way back for Democrats a pretty long way? Like,
Oh,
it's going to take a long time to build that. It doesn't mean the Democrats can't win elections. It just means if they're either going to be the party of the government can work and people's faith in the government has been destroyed, what's the way back?
yeah, and it's going to be tough, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy too. Of course, this is I used to write about. I used to be obsessed with that question. I wrote this book called, it was called The Wrecking Crew, and it was about how delivering bad government then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, a vicious circle, whatever you want to call it. It further erodes people's faith in government. I just want to point out to you that Trump has now appointed Elon Musk to run something called the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And I'm laughing because it is kind of a joke on everybody, but he's re-upping. This is something people haven't noticed. He's re-upping something called the Grace Commission, which Ronald Reagan set up back in the mid 80s. And that was also run by, one of the great tycoons of the era, J. Peter Grace. And the idea was that government can't do anything right. We need to outsource and we need to privatize. And they actually did this in the Reagan years in a sort of fantastic way. And I think we're going to see that happening all over again. And that's so you've got a government, you've got effectively a government agency that is set up to convince people that government can't do anything right. And then it's all rife with conflicts of interest and all the rest of it. But yeah, you're exactly right. You're talking about a big question, and you're talking about a long, long, long road back. And look, the Democrats at the sort of national level, the presidential level, have been content for a very long time with the prospect of just eking out these very narrow victories, right? There's nothing like, Johnson versus Goldwater. That's never going to happen again. Nothing like Franklin Roosevelt's, 4 monster victories or anything like that. That's off the table. Their plan is to do what, you quoted Chuck Schumer as doing before. They're going to fight for these former Republicans in the suburbs and win them over. And maybe Trump will screw up as president. I mean, there's a really good chance Trump will screw up and they'll get back in without having to change anything. But unless there is fundamental change in the Democratic Party, no, you're not going to see a return to that.
So Ro, that's a question that goes back to you, which is, you're talking to your colleagues. I mean, you are a Democratic Party leader. Your colleagues in Congress are Democratic Party leaders. I feel like we've been here before, and I think a lot of us remember what being here before has been like. Oh, there's like a lot of hand wringing, and then it's sort of back to the norm. And I think people look at what happened, the re-election of the House leadership, the re-election of the Senate Democratic leadership, which is not to pick on any one individual leader, but you look at other countries when they get wiped out in an election, it's like the leaders are gone, goodbye. And so I think from the outside, it does feel like, is this a moment of change, or is this nothing will fundamentally change? I mean, what are you hearing from your colleagues, and is this different than, let's say, 2016 or 2004? What's your take on that?
It is different. I've been in Congress 8 years. 2016, a lot of people afterwards thought it was a fluke. It was Hillary Clinton didn't visit Wisconsin. We didn't see this coming. It could have been a better run campaign. Now it's sort of Donald Trump carried the popular vote. He won all 7 battleground states. There's a real problem. I mean, I think there's across the caucus a recognition that the old ways aren't working. And that there's a need for something new. And there's been more people, it's not just me, saying, let's make sure that there's a house cleaning of the political operative class. I had a senior person, I'm not going to say who, in leadership, pulled me aside. I thought he was going to scold me for saying that. And he said, you're absolutely right. I couldn't get them to return my phone calls. It's almost like you got these 35-year-old or 40-year-old political operatives who have far more power than the elected officials when it comes to the policy and the gobbledygook that they come out in these campaigns. I mean, one of the things, look, I want to talk to Tom's excellent historical points, but when Blue trying to tell the Harris campaign, I love the idea of, expanding home care for the elderly. I was a big supporter of Bernie Sanders' proposal. You're not going to get elected leader of the free world by saying, I'm going to put home care for the elderly. That's not how we elect presidents. We don't elect presidents by saying, okay, I'm going to give you this program because it polls well. That's what Bernie was saying during Build Back Better, but that's not why Bernie was Bernie. Bernie was Bernie because he told a story that appealed to people's real life experiences, that they were being shafted by a system, that they were watching people, not my parents are middle class, but literally people who are recent immigrants to this country who are now thriving in places like Silicon Valley through innovation. But they're thinking, look, their ancestors didn't fight in the wars. We built America. We fought in the wars, and we're getting screwed, right? And that's the anger that Donald Trump is tapping into. So until we understand that anger and we have a real vision for how we're going to bring new industry, new economic opportunity, new a shot at a decent American life, you're going to have more and more polarization around culture and race and resentment for more recent newcomers. Now, Tom's point, which I thought was so thoughtful about this commission, here is the irony. Elon Musk in FDR's age would probably have been one of the dollar a year men. He would have probably been the guy that FDR brought in to say, Elon, you're going to build the new gigafactory. And by the way, it's going to be union and we're going to build America. And instead of having these billionaires and industrialists, because part of government to be part of a solution in reindustrialization, the ultimate irony is they're there tearing apart the institutions of government. It's not going to do a thing for many of these communities. But until we have a bold enough vision to convince people that we're actually going to change things in their economic life and their kids' life, you're going to have the continued dissatisfaction with the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and I think obviously the Democrats can eke out wins like they did in 2020, where we're in this potential paradigm where Donald Trump or whatever Republican placeholders there wrecks the place. People are like, I'm sick of that, get out. And then the Democrats don't deliver, and people are like, get out. I mean, as I said recently, we have had now 4 out of the last 5 presidential elections have been basically throw the bums out. And the only reason it didn't happen, in my view, in 2012 was because the Republicans nominated the human personification of Gordon Gekko. Like, Barack Obama got so lucky that they nominated Mitt Romney, who is like a walking stereotype of an aristocrat, whatever you want to call it. Like, as I said, Gordon Gekko. So 4 out of the last 5 elections voting to throw people out because people are so angry. And I think I think that's going to keep happening. And I think then the question is, okay, like Tom Frank, you're the head of the DNC. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're the head of the DNC.
So that's never going to happen, Mr. Sirota.
Okay, but I'm saying, like, let's go into my magical world where Tom Frank is the head of the DNC, or Tom Frank can wave a wand and get 2 or 3 wishes granted. You can like change the Democratic Party right now. What are the 2 or 3 things to start a process?
But I don't need to say. I mean, Khanna just nailed it. He said exactly what you have to do, right? And it starts with the narrative. It starts with the story. Unfortunately, I think at this point, I mean, what I want to talk about is how do we get these guys off the dime, right? How do we get this change within the Democratic Party going? Because over the years, they've been so. One of the things, I'm going to say something nice about Trump here. Look at what he did to the Republicans. This is something I never thought I would see when I was growing up and writing about the Republican Party, because they had this kind of, militaristic, organization. And he walked in with a sledgehammer and smashed the whole thing. And the Democratic Party up until now has successfully resisted that sort of thing. They're very reluctant to ever throw things open to have a debate about the direction that the party is going in. I mean, look at what happened with the primaries this year. And then when Biden finally did decide, and I have a lot of nice things to say about Biden. There's not any time to say it, and it wouldn't make any difference anyway. But when he finally did decide to step aside from being the candidate, There was this brief moment where they considered having an open convention where we would actually debate things. Wouldn't that have been extraordinary? Wouldn't that have been? But then they wouldn't have been. And instead, what happened was, they chose Kamala Harris by a process that we still don't really understand, and you had a convention that was again almost militaristic, not militaristic, but in its organization was, there was no note of dissent, right? In the whole thing, there was,
Look, I've said before, dissent is not really tolerated right now in the Democratic Party, and in fact, presidential primaries are one of the only places where any kind of debate has really been allowed. And I would argue that 2020 was still a sort of stifled forum. I mean, there was a lot in 2020, and I worked on that campaign, that was all about you can't be too mean to each other. And I remember thinking back, and Ro, I'd be curious your thoughts on this. I remember thinking back to 2008. I mean, 2008 was one of the nastiest, most vicious primaries. And by the way, I applaud that. That's what primaries are supposed to be for. They're supposed to be like, we go at each other. Yeah, like Obama went after Clinton. Clinton went after. I'm not mad at Clinton for going after Obama. I'm not mad at, like, that's what it's supposed to battle test you. And I think by 2020 there was this. I mean, they did debate and they did duke it out a little bit, but there was this. Oh, we have to be like really nice to each other. And then 2024 there was like no primary at all. Now, granted, there were some special circumstances, obviously with Biden getting out, but even floating the idea of an open convention was like, oh, how dare you? And this is weird. And I feel like the Democratic Party's lack of tolerance for dissent. Now I may be taking it too far here, but I feel like it reaches back to the 70s where there's this fear of the McGovern, like things get too messy. And when they get too messy,
exactly.
right? When they get too messy, it gets bad. But they just got their ass beat by Donald Trump for like a second time. So I wonder, do you think there's any recognition in the party, Ro, that this attempt to shut down dissent is actually part of the problem of taking a once vibrant party and making it not as vibrant and frankly not as competitive?
I'm not sure that there's some recognition, but I'll tell you to Tom's point, the irony of it is, who's defeated the establishments of both parties? Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
I mean, he's like literally smashed from the Clintons to now the status quo here to the Bushes and you're going to have him fundamentally be a lame duck president. J.D. Vance is realizing that he's putting all his competitors in the cabinet. He's got no loyalty to Vance. And you're going to have, in 2028, probably the most open primary on both parties that this country has ever seen. And I think that is going to be this huge clash of ideas and battles. And it's going to be liberated from the party elites on both sides. And no one knows what's going to happen. But I think that there is some health in the just destruction of a governing class that certainly is not the greatest generation. I mean, and we can argue, they've done good things as well. I don't want to throw them all under the bus, but there were huge blind spots to this governing class. Wars overseas, the myths of deindustrialization. And it's finally, I think, at a point where you're going to have a lot of new voices emerge and conflict and new ideas. And that'll be good for the country to rebuild. And it's the best shot for the Democratic Party to rebuild.
I'm going to summarize some questions here. Here's one. I want to go back to you again, Ro, for a sec. The question of are we talking around the central problem here, which is the problem at the center of our podcast series, Master Plan, which is to say the unwillingness to tell a story that needs to be told, a real story about what's really been going on in this country's economy for decades at this point. How much of it on a day-to-day basis has to do with the campaign finance system, whether it's, I can't say this or that because my donors will get mad at me, or I can't say this or that because a super PAC will come in and spend against me. And again, that's whether it's an issue of corporate power, the drug companies and the like, Wall Street, or it's an issue of Israel Palestine, and I'm the AIPAC spending people into the ground for talking about that issue. I had a lawmaker say to me that the toughest kind and the most pervasive kind of corruption that this lawmaker deals with is not the cash in an envelope for a favor kind of corruption. It's that anytime this lawmaker is trying to get somebody on to help him or work with him on a bill, all a special interest has to do, a corporate interest has to do, is shake the change in their wallet to basically scare any lawmakers from working with him, scare them to make them know we're going to spend against you in the election. So I guess my question is, how much of what we're talking about, the Democratic Party's unwillingness to tell a coherent, cogent story, how much of that has to do with the campaign finance system?
And can I throw out, you're talking about the stick. There's also the carrot.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes. Right.
And
You'll be rewarded if you say the right things.
You'll be rewarded,
right.
And this is I think this is a huge part of it, and it may even be subconscious. But you've got to. By the way, I want to take a step back. Am I allowed to talk? Is this my turn?
For sure, yes. And then we'll get Rose answer too.
There has been a democratic version of like this institutional revolution, this revolution within the party, and it was the Clinton faction back in the 80s and the 90s. And there were all of these different groups always coming up. They called themselves, they had different names. The Atari Democrats, the Democratic Leadership Council. Do you remember this?
Right. Yes.
And
totally.
they did successfully. You go back and look at their rhetoric. I've written about this so many times, but they openly said, we cannot be the party of the New Deal. We have to be the party of Wall Street, of financial innovation. And we have to reach out to these highly educated people because they're the enlightened ones, and they're the ones who they are the embodiment of globalization. But there's this other, it's also really nice to be the party of rich people in the suburbs. That's a really, gratifying place for a politician to be. I'm going to tell you one more anecdote, okay, and then I'll shut up. So when Harry Truman, the last president who did not have a college degree, and when Harry Truman was done being president, he went back to Kansas City. He was from a suburb of Kansas City, Independence, Missouri. And he famously said, the reporters asked him, Mr. President, what did you do when you got home? And he said, I carried in the suitcases, because that's, and his house that he went to live in belonged to his wife's mother, because Truman himself didn't own a house, and all he had to live on was his pension as a soldier in World War I. And his poverty was so embarrassing to the nation that they passed they passed a law to give ex-presidents a pension. And if you ever visit the Truman Library in Kansas City, you'll notice it's only a single story. It cost a little over $1 million. Truman went out and raised the money personally to build it. It costs a little over $1 million. If you go to the ones that they're building now, the Clinton Library, the George W. Bush Library, or this incredible edifice that Obama is putting up in the south side of Chicago.
Yeah,
These things cost hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
Right.
And you don't get there by being the party of working people.
Right.
You don't get to have that.
Right. So Ro, I mean, that's actually beyond campaign finance, but I guess I would throw it to you and ask, on a day-to-day basis, all that we're talking about here, like the party could be telling a story, it's not telling this story, it could be doing this, it could be doing that, it's not doing this. How much of it is driven by the campaign finance system?
Well, it's obviously there, but it's deeper than that. Let me just pick up. I love Tom's story. One of my favorite Truman stories is they had invited him to give a speech in Washington after he was president, and he writes a letter saying, I'm a bit embarrassed, but could you pay for Betsy's train fare, because I can't afford to come without that. I mean, now, you get $500,000 a pop, even if you're not president, if you're the cabinet, as cabinet secretary. So, there's just been such a difference in terms of the monetization of politics. And obviously, in a very crude sense, the big money it plays a role. I mean, people are afraid of super PAC spending. They want to raise funds. You need to be catered to a donor class, but it's deeper than that. And here's why that's problematic, because it's almost what the biggest fear is, offending kind of the groupthink. It's getting out of the New York Times and Post and institutional academies worldview. And whether, I'm not smart enough to know whether it's money that's influenced all of the ideology. But what you have with the Democratic Party, the real timidness is saying, well, do I really want to get out in front of the conventional? Can we just nibble at it and have a couple sound bites and a better way of phrasing things? And I think what was so liberating about Bernie's campaign, and obviously I'm biased, was he just smashed through that. And he said, no, look, like, we can be for Medicare for all. We can be for free public college. We're going to think in a whole different direction. And now there are people doing that, even the ones who may not be as pure on the fundraising, just because he smashed through some of the ideology. The second point I want to make about the story, because I do think it comes down to that, is we as Democrats, right, these days, we tend to think our job is just legislation. And I love President Biden, I think, in many ways. There are points I disagree. But he was the consummate, okay, we passed the legislation. And I think there's a very big difference between passing a legislation and seeing a factory actually come up in a community, or talking to a person like Chauncey, who was 43-year-old. I heard him on a podcast, African-American, whose Master Lock factory today in 2022, because of NAFTA, leaves, and he's out of a job and says he shook hands with Obama but isn't ever going to vote again. Like, we didn't do enough of stuff in communities, talking to people, talking about what actually was either getting built or how they were being helped. And it was a very abstract, though I think Biden corrected some of the mistakes of the party, was in that direction. It wasn't deep enough. It wasn't visible enough. It wasn't theatrical enough. And so I think it just got lost in legislation. If you look at how Trump speaks, he rarely says, I'm going to pass this and that bill. He says, I will fix the border. I don't agree with how he's going to do it, but he doesn't say, I will pass comprehensive legislation to deal with the border. Like, it's about the result. And I think that we need to be better storytellers. And that's what ultimately politicians are. Like, where is America? Why did we get shafted? Where are you going to take us? Not some 16-point plan.
So Tom, I want to ask you, this is, again, summarizing some of these questions. The question of how the Democratic Party produces its nominees. Now, again, I want to, 2024, special situation, some would argue emblematic of a party that's afraid of democracy. But if we can look at the demographics that the Democrats did worst or lost ground in this election. You've got Latinos, young people, working class people, generally, and men. Those happen to be the demographics that Bernie Sanders was strongest among in his runs for president. And the Democratic Party in 2016 and 2020 basically negatively gendered his entire movement as Bernie bros, basically said, screw you. And I'm not saying that people took that message and then, left the party, but I do wonder if that was part of it. But here's the question that really, looking forward, that I wonder about. Is there something about the Democratic Party's primary electorate that will not and does not preference the kinds of nominees that can win against Trumpism, right? That is there something about the people who are particularly powerful, the voting electorate, inside of the Democratic Party, that is preferencing what I guess political folks would call wine track candidates, right? There's the wine track and the beer track, right? Yeah. That are not best positioned to win general elections. I think what I'm asking is the old Bernie Sanders argument that Bernie Sanders politics is the electability argument. The electability argument was made against Bernie. He's not electable. That was the big argument, and look, maybe that singularizes to Bernie as like a guy who has explicitly said he's a socialist. He's sort of a Larry David looking kind of guy, right? I say that with all love, right? But Bernie Sanders, like, is there something about the Bernie Sanders kind of politics is the most electable kind of politics that's not landing among the Democratic electorate?
Yeah, electorate, or you mean leadership, right? Because
No, I'm talking about the primary electorate, right? Like, is there something about the Democratic Party's primary electorate that is electing the nominees for the general?
yeah.
Is there something about,
So
is
that
the,
I don't know the answer to that, David. I thought that Bernie was electable, and I thought he could in 2016, especially. I thought that he that it was totally possible for him to win. I mean, it was a surprise, right? I live here in the suburbs of DC, and before 2016, Bernie Sanders was always spoken of as a crank, always.
always?
And then all of a sudden he comes out and delivers these shocking wins. And we both know, you and I both know people who like Republicans who liked him, right? Who thought he was a straight shooter. And my dad liked his accent. My dad was was pretty conservative, but there was something about Sanders that reminded him of the Democrats of long ago, who my dad had a very, he remembered Roosevelt as the great leader. And there was something about Sanders that was reminiscent of that, but that means nothing. What I want to point out is, so Ro Khanna earlier was talking about this ideology that, and there's been various names for it, but he was talking about, you see it in the media, you see it in academia, you see it at Davos, you see it in the NGOs. It's everywhere you go, and its conquest of the Democratic Party is something. Remember, I tried to trace this years ago. And the conquest basically was finalized with the victory of Bill Clinton. And one of the things about that ideology is that it is extremely flattering to the kind of people who run the Democratic Party. And it says you are, uniquely sensitive, uniquely virtuous, and uniquely attuned to the great economic forces of our time, which they often summarize with the word globalization. And it's really not, and then also you get paid real well. And this, it's going to be very, very difficult to pry people away from that vision. I mean, that vision is so beautiful and so compelling, and it makes so much sense. So the word that I used in my New York Times article the other day that they cut out for reasons of house style, I'm not holding it against them or anything, but I said it makes too much pundit sense. Think about it. All those Tom Friedman columns over the years.
Right.
David Brooks appears to have changed sides, but back in the old day, right?
I know.
It makes too much pundit sense. It's going to be really, and Sanders, by the way, and Sanders comes from this world that they think they've left behind, that they think they put behind them way back in the 1970s. And it's kind of like offensive even to them that they have to debate it still.
It's such a good point. It's such a good point, the way you put that. Ro Khanna, if and when you've got to go, just let us know. We're holding you a little bit over time. I want to ask you this question about media, and I want to preface this question by saying there's a lot of talk about the Democrats need their own Joe Rogan. This drives me crazy on like 8 levels. Like, first of all,
David Sirota. Given the growth trajectory,
right.
That's what I'm counting on. By 26, etc.
Right. I'll be Joe Rogan, God forbid. But what drives me crazy about this on multiple levels is, one, Bernie Sanders was ripped apart for going on Joe Rogan, and now it's like we need our own Joe. It's like, fine, okay, you know what? Better late than never. People have arrived. Democrats need to engage with media that is outside of their comfort zone. And there was a set of exit polls that came up that Trump overwhelmingly won people who do not get their news and information from traditional media. You are somebody who has engaged with independent, non-corporate, alternate, non-traditional media way before most of your colleagues have ever engaged with that kind of media. And I appreciate that. And I think it's prescient, and I think it's smart politics. It's not just moral, it's smart. But I feel like the zeitgeist of media has the irreverent media used to be alternate alt weeklies. And now a lot of that is on the right because I think the Democrats and liberals have really not engaged and cultivated and operated with any kind of independent media. So all that's a preface to say, why have your colleagues, Democratic leaders, Democratic politicians, been so hesitant to engage with different kinds of media? Why does it feel like they only want to talk to MSNBC, the New York Times? Is it a comfort level thing? They don't want to be asked uncomfortable questions. And do you think there's going to be a realization that, hey, we got to get out of our bubble?
I think it goes back to Tom and your point about this consensus in the academy, in mainstream media, in the think tanks. And so if you're a careful politician, one of the biggest things you can do is transgress that consensus in a major way. Well, when you go on a lot of podcasts and you have to think for yourself and say things, you're going to say things that you may regret. That's the part of thinking out loud and engaging. And you probably will say things that if they played back a soundbite like you did with Schumer, you may think, I shouldn't have said that. But you know what people have seen, I think, with on the other side is they say a lot of dumb things, but then it doesn't matter because people feel like, okay, they're being themselves. We're getting a sense of them. And I think the media landscape has changed. It's no longer let's just avoid making a gaffe. Let's avoid having the comma in the wrong place. It's can you get out there so people get a sense of who you are? I always tell my colleagues, I said, when you go on one of these things, ignore the comments because 50% of the comments, I'm sure if I looked here, 50% of the comments will be saying terrible things.
Yeah.
But you know what happens?
Don't read the letters to the editor. Never,
You know?
never. I'm sorry. I should never say. I should shut my mouth.
No, but you know what? You know what happens is that they will at the end of the day. I've had so many people come up to me and say, you know what? We didn't agree with you, but thank you for going on, Brianna Joy. Thank you for going on, Breaking Points. Thank you for taking hard questions and for being a bit real. Most people don't have perfectly thought out answers, and it just shows if you're not willing to mix it up in the media, how are you going to mix it up with an ideology that most people think has failed them and a system that has failed them for 50 years? How are you going to have the guts to take that on? The last point, and then I'll give the last floor to Tom, but it was brilliant writing, and I've learned from it, and to you, David. But I think that, and this is a bias of mine because this is obviously my politics. I think what Bernie did was absolutely essential. And the central question of our time is we've gone from 53rd as America in the world in income inequality to 128. Right? China is at 77. Western democracies are in the 30s. And Bernie's like, how in the world, where you've got Ro Khanna's district, where they're inventing AI and making more wealth than has ever been produced in human history, can we not have Medicare for all? How in the world can we not have free public college? How in the world can we not have basics? And I think in that, he was right. But I think if we frame that, where I think, to Tom's point about this kind of sensitivity of people saying, well, the economy is changing, technology is changing. People want a sense that you kind of understand that, okay, yeah, we may want some of FDR's values, but it's not FDR's world. And I think if we can sell progressivism in a future-oriented way, that, yeah, we can use some of this technology to reindustrialize America, to create good jobs, but we still need Medicare for all and free college. And by the way, we're producing so much wealth that we can do it, that you can, if we can frame progressivism as future-looking, not backward-looking, then I think that it can become a majoritarian coalition and certainly can win in the Democratic primary in the country. But of course, someone can say, well, Ro, that's your politics a bit self-serving, but that's really what I believe.
Okay, wait, Ro, before you go, and we're coming up on an hour here, and I want to respect everyone's time. Before you go, I've got to ask this question. And Tom, you can weigh in on it after Ro, because I know Ro's schedule is a little bit
I'll listen
tight.
I'll listen to Tom's answer before leaving.
Oh, okay, fine. So it's the question of that I'm putting it in quotes, but it is what it is. The question of wokeism. Okay, like this whole idea that the Democrats lost because and my view is people are saying, oh, the Democrats are too woke. I mean, Kamala Harris did a lot of things wrong in this race. I don't think she ran as the woke candidate. I mean, I think the Republicans depicted her and took her record, pieces of her record, to depict her as overly so-called woke. But I think the question here is this: is that we are now living in a nationalized political environment where it used to be you could have your own sort of separate cultural politics as a member of Congress from a district in a different part of the country. But the thing that unified the Democrats was a basic idea that the Democrats were on the side of the working class. There might be anti-choice Democrats, there might be culturally conservative Democrats, pro-gun Democrats, et cetera, et cetera. But here's what I think the political challenge is that it's harder to be a local Democrat with idiosyncratic cultural politics in a nationalized political environment where if you run for statewide office, you're going from wherever you are, you're going to be called and depicted as Nancy Pelosi. So I think the question is that one of the fundamental changes that makes it harder for Democrats to individual Democratic candidates? I mean, I worked in Montana. When Brian Schweitzer won that very red state, he ran as a pro-gun Democrat, right? But I feel like if he ran for office now, and I'm not saying I agree with his gun politics or whatever, but what I'm saying is if Democrats run statewide in Montana, they're instantly now depicted as Nancy Pelosi. So I think the question is, does the nationalization of politics make it harder for Democrats on an individual level to culturally break free of cultural caricatures vis-a-vis their own districts, their own states?
Yes, I mean, I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right. I mean, it probably is harder to run as a Jared Golden in Maine and take positions that are counter to how the Democratic Party is being perceived. But I think there's some simple things that the party can do. One is you don't have to give up your convictions on issues to say that we can respect someone who disagrees and not shame them or cancel them or think that you're better than them, right? I mean, some of it is just take these positions, whatever they are, but recognize that other people may have competing values and they're not always coming at it from a bad place. The other thing is to have belief in, America. I was at a conservative conference and I was amazed of all the things I said. The thing that got the most applause is I started talking about, my grandfather spending 4 years in jail alongside Gandhi in the Indian independence movement. And I said, I'm really glad for America because Churchill wouldn't have decolonized India if it weren't for FDR. And America has done a lot that's good in the world, right? And so one can be critical of things in America if you understand the broader narrative, that this is still an incredible country and that it's still the most open political system. And then the final point I would make is, and I've said this before with the Virginia race, when the big issue was like, are we teaching critical race theory in our schools? And McAuliffe was like, well, of course we're not teaching critical race theory in the schools. And I said we're not dealing with what people are really asking, right? What are people really asking? And what people really want to know is, are you teaching our kids to be embarrassed of being white? Are you teaching our kids to be embarrassed about being American? Right? So like, why don't we actually talk about things in a real way? Like if we want to talk, I don't want to have time to talk about transgender rights, but our instinct is like, oh, we just don't want to talk about it. Let's just not talk about it. No, talk about it. And then what we should have said is, of course, no one should be embarrassed about being white or American. Abraham Lincoln was a white American. Madison was a white American. The young men who scaled the cliffs of Normandy were white Americans. But you know what great countries do? Unlike Russia and China and almost every country else in the world, we're great precisely because we do teach about slavery and Jim Crow. And that's what precisely makes us exceptional. But we are so afraid of our own shadows often, of delving into these issues in a real way and having real conversation with respect, that I think it's offensive to people and people feel that we don't have a real point of view about where America should be. So
yeah, they sense the inauthenticity. That's right. They sense the fear. They sense the right that we're not willing to have a conversation bluntly about what the issue is. I mean, Tom, I'll ask you. I'll just build off of that. Donald Trump ran all those anti-trans ads, and there was a tagline on those ads that said, she's for they, them, he's for you. I think that was the tagline
the
or something like
pronouns.
that. Yeah. And my view on this, and you could tell me if you agree and your thoughts on this. My feeling is that those ads were designed obviously not just for people who are sort of anti-trans bigots. Those ads are designed to say that the Democrats are focused on these niche issues, these issues that aren't affecting your daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And we, the Republicans, are focused on like these big, inflation, like you can't pay for food, right? So I wonder if you agree, and I wonder what you think the way out of this is for Democrats beyond just what you've heard on cable TV news, which is like, the Democrats have to basically throw people of color, throw minority groups, throw LGBTQ people under the bus, like explicitly, even more explicit. I mean, Jon Stewart did that whole thing where he showed, some Democratic ads were basically throwing people under the bus already. Like, what's your response to that?
Well, on the one hand, it's reprehensible, and you should call people by their, if someone has a pronoun that they've chosen, you should try to be a good person. And, that just seems so obvious to me. At the same time, David, you will recall the main thesis of What's the Matter with Kansas was, why are the Republicans, I asked, why are the Republicans winning these people who really have no business, being in the Republican Party? And the answer that I gave at the time, and maybe I think I was right, but the answer I gave at the time was the culture wars, that the culture wars are always phrased as class war, always. And I dug down into a whole bunch of the different culture wars, from abortion to the theory of evolution, which I still can't believe we were fighting about that in Kansas back then, but they were. And, the war on Christmas or whatever, they're all phrased as class wars, as these obnoxious elites pressing their values down on you, the average American. And you are absolutely right that Kamala Harris did not emphasize the ID politics or wokeness or anything like that, and that was a smart move on her part. But at the same time, there's this enormous structure that we have been talking about that the public identifies with Democrats, whether we like it or not. And you can't stop them. And they are going to continue down this road. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's a really good book that's out right now by a sociologist I forget where he teaches, but his name is Musa Al-Gharbi. And it's a sociological dissection of wokeness, and I'm not doing him justice to summarize it in this way, but he says that what's going on is that you've got a class of people who use concerns about race and gender for reasons of social class, right? That they don't really care about these things. It's all about establishing their prestige, their status, using academic terms in a public conversation. That's very intimidating to someone who hasn't gone to Princeton or whatever the hell it is, And so I totally get that. And at the same time, me, I'm one of these goddamn liberals who believes all this stuff. I remember when I'm sorry, enough anecdotes. I have to go cook dinner for the family.
Yes.
Do you want to hear want to hear one more?
Give us one more.
It'll make you laugh.
And we're gonna wrap it up. Yes, give us one more.
I suspect that most of your viewers are too young to remember this, but the initial uproar over political correctness. This was a term that was not widely used. We used to use it in left-wing circles to describe people who were like Maoists or something, and we would sort of laugh at them. And then it got picked up by the Wall Street Journal it was either in 1990 or in 1991, and they started running this series of editorials about it. And they had these cartoons from a student newspaper at Brown University. Do you remember all this?
I remember a friend of mine recently said it's time for the resurgence of the movie PCU. He was saying,
I haven't seen that, but anyhow, I remember this because my dad thought, so I'm not a guy who's like really politically correct. I'm not that guy. Right. And even though I try to be a good guy and I try to be polite and I use, people want to, their pronouns. I respect that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not one of those people. But my dad, in his eyes, I was. And so I remember he clipped one of those Wall Street Journal editorials out. He may have clipped the whole series out and sent them to me, right? He really wanted me to see that. So that's because he thought I was priggish and intolerant and sanctimonious, and it's funny. And now the shoe's on the other foot.
So listen, here's what we're going to do. Khanna, Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for taking time with us today. Thank you. I really want to reiterate this to everybody. Whether you agree with Ro on everything or nothing, whether you like him, don't like him, Khanna has engaged with independent media and with us specifically for since we started, and we really appreciate it. You are extremely accessible, and we can debate things and we can disagree, and I think that is very, very rare in the Democratic Party.
If I could just make one comment, David, isn't the fact that a person named Musa Al-Ghabi can write a book about wokeness sort of give hope about multiracial America? Like, where else is that going on? Where else in the world?
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
100%. So, Khanna, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, David.
And Tom Frank, thank you. You got to go make dinner. So, Tom Frank, thank you so much. We'll have you both back. We would love to have you both back. So thank you guys. Thank you both for being here. And here's what we're gonna do right now. So you guys can jet. I'm gonna take.
I will
a bunch
see you
more.
Later, Mr. Sirota.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
And I'm gonna take.
I like that. You're the next Joe Rogan. I like that. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. Let's make it happen.
Don't tell my wife. Okay, bye. From folks right now. Folks have been, and I've tried to summarize those questions to everybody during that part of the program. And now I'm going to take a bunch more questions, and I'm just going to try to be. We've gotten a lot of questions, so we're trying to deal with all of them. Let me take this from Kevin C. Kevin writes, I think corporate money and personhood is the biggest problem we have. What do we think of the move to amend movement? We talked about that in Master Plan at the end of Master Plan. If you haven't listened to Master Plan, go become a subscriber there. You can find it. Just search Master Plan in your podcast app. As I said in this episode, in this show, corporate money and money in politics is at the center of a lot of this. I think that the Democratic Party can't talk about what we've been talking about in a coherent way because it's constantly trying to appease the donor class and speak to the working class. And as I've described it this way, there's a Venn diagram. On one side, there's a circle of what the donors want. On the other side, there's a circle of what the voters want. And so the reason why the Democratic Party is talking in such a small way, on such a small set of issues, reproductive choice, democracy, and the like, is because those are the very few things that don't offend the donor class but may appeal to parts of the electorate. But obviously, the election proved that doesn't work. And I think that Venn diagram is based on what Kevin has raised here, which is the need to raise lots and lots of money for elections. And that is a central problem. And Citizens United is ultimately at the center of it. So yes, that is a big problem. Let's see. I'm going to take a couple more questions here. This is from, will the Democrats unilaterally disarm from being a corporate donor-serving elected enrichment program? I think that's the central tension, right? The central tension is, how do you ask a political party inside of a corrupt system to unilaterally disarm and not raise lots of money? I mean, that is a central problem. But I will say this. There are ways for the party, and it's a shame that it hasn't happened, there are ways for the party to limit the influence of money. They could pass the Disclose Act, which would at least bring dark money spending out into the open. They could have the SEC require better transparency. They could publicly finance elections. Some states have done that. And as you'll learn in Master Plan, the states that have done that, it's not some radical idea. And some of them are Republican states and some of them are Democratic states. This is a question. If the panel agrees that the U.S. is a duopoly, is not likely to be replaced by a multi-party system, how would you recommend that activists and citizens organize in advance of the midterms? Great question. My view on that is I'm agnostic when it comes to third parties or inside of the Democratic Party in terms of organizing. But I would say this. I do agree with what Ro Khanna said, that Democratic primaries are a place, one of the last places in Democratic politics where dissent can be tolerated, where dissenters can win. So I would be looking in advance of the midterm elections to elections where the party primaries can produce better nominees, more populist nominees, nominees who can speak to the working class. Let's see. Lauren asked us a question about media. We talked about that. I'll take one more question here. Okay, this is from Claire. I think a lot of people have asked this question. Okay, so this is an important question. It's a good one to end on. Do the Democrats really even care about winning? It's much easier to stand on the sidelines complaining about what the other side is doing wrong rather than defending what they are actually doing or not doing. That's from Claire. And I do think that this election raises that question. How serious were the Democrats about actually winning? I would tell you this, having worked in campaigns. I think consciously the rank and file members of the Democratic Party, the Democratic leaders, they told themselves that they wanted to win. I don't think they were, hey, I don't care about winning. I don't think that's the way it works. I think the real question is, are you willing to do what's necessary to win? Are you willing to get out of your comfort zone and do what's necessary to win? Having worked on a presidential campaign and having worked on other campaigns, what I can tell you is that the process tests you. The process tests whether you have the fortitude to do what's necessary to win. I go back to that 2008 presidential primary. Barack Obama proved that he was willing to rip that nomination out of the hands of the Clinton machine. The process tested him, and he passed the test. Now, I don't think on policy he passed the test as president. And I think a lot of the reason that we're here right now is because of when you turn hope and change into more of the same, guess what? You get what we're now living through. But the point is that I don't think the Democratic Party leaders in this election were willing to even consider doing what was necessary to actually win. They saw a risk aversion strategy. Just be a generic Democrat as the best strategy. The people just don't like Donald Trump. Just run as a generic Democrat. That's risk aversion. The problem is risk aversion is highly risky in a political terrain that was tilted against the incumbent. It was an absolutely idiotic strategy. Ask yourself this question. How did Franklin Roosevelt get reelected in the middle of the Great Depression? It's one thing to get elected with a huge landslide against the incumbent, Herbert Hoover. That's not saying that's easy, but that's pretty straightforward. How do you get, as the incumbent, reelected in the middle of the Great Depression? And the answer is that Franklin Roosevelt, the famous line from that reelection race was, "I welcome their hatred." He didn't say people are wrong to be unhappy. He didn't say people's economic discontent is wrong. And you heard the Democrats sort of say that. Why aren't people more grateful for the economy? Joe Biden's done, and look, I've said Joe Biden's done some great things on economic policy. He could have done more. I've said that the macro economy is strong. But the Democratic Party, a lot of what they said is you're misled. The media has misled you. You're ungrateful if you're not happy with the economy. That is exactly the opposite of what FDR did. FDR said, I am not happy with the progress that we've made. We need to do a lot more. That the oligarchs are standing against us and preventing us from doing more, and they hate me, and I welcome their hatred. That's a fundamentally different and opposite campaign than what the Democrats ran in 2024. And here we are. And I don't think the Democratic Party was willing to do. I don't think the people, the strategists, the people who run the Democratic Party were willing to do what FDR was willing to do in running that kind of campaign. Because I think parts of the Democratic Party are part of that oligarchy, and thus the party does not welcome the hatred of the oligarchy. I mean, remember, Bernie Sanders at the Democratic Convention, you have to see it to believe it. He gives his anti-billionaire speech. It's followed up immediately by J.B. Pritzker bragging about being a billionaire, which is then followed up by a former American Express CEO saying that Kamala Harris understands that government's job is to work in partnership with the business community. That is not a party that welcomes the hatred. And the big question now is whether it can ever become that party. And we're going to leave it there. And that's what we're going to continue to report on at The Lever. We're also obviously going to report on the Trump administration and what it's doing. I want to leave you with this in your mind. If you support the work that we're doing, if you're sick of the media telling you a story that is false, that was clearly proven false, if you think the media fell down during this election, pitch in to support what we're doing, pitch in to support independent media. You can give us a one-time donation. It helps do events like this. We're going to do more events like this. We do all sorts of bonus content for our paying subscribers to thank you. I don't apologize for asking you to pitch in. We cannot do this work without readers and subscribers supporting us. If you like the media, the big media out there right now, don't support us. They don't rely on your money. They rely on big corporate advertisers, and they rely on billionaires. They don't need your money. If you want a different media, pitch in to help us. You can make a one-time donation. You can become a paying subscriber. If you can't afford to become a full paying subscriber, you can email us. We could try to figure out a way you can pitch in. But my point is, you don't have to be a passive media consumer. I think what we're trying to create is a media movement that isn't, one or two giant oligarchs funding media. It's a grassroots funded media, because a grassroots funded media can do the kind of reporting that we do that other media don't, because we don't have to answer to the oligarchy if we are a grassroots funded newsroom. So I just want to leave you with that. Please pitch in if you can, and please keep coming to the events that we're doing. Subscribe to our newsletter, our free newsletter, our paid newsletter. Just pitch in, engage. We are going to need a lot of engagement moving into what could be a very tumultuous and dark time in our country's history. And one last thing. Engage, because it sounds kind of cheesy, but right now, I think now more than ever, we all need that feeling of community and connection. Ultimately, that is what is going to get us out of this. I think we are all so separated from one another. We are all so isolated that one of the other ways, the bowling alone phenomenon, one of the other things that can be done here is remember that solidarity and community is ultimately what is going to get us through this. So I don't want to end so sentimentally, but I really have been thinking a lot about that. I may write on it soon. Just want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you at the next live event. Thanks again.